Tonight, we continue our series, China, Power and Prosperity, with what the U.S. calls one of the worst human rights crises of our time. Uighurs are Muslims who trace their roots back through thousands of years in Central Asia. Today, most of them, about 11 million, live in the Chinese province Xinjiang. They represent less than 1% of the population in a country that is 92% Han Chinese, the ethnicity that China traces back to an ancient Chinese empire. Communist China has long persecuted people based on their religion. But the U.S., international groups, and Uighurs say this is different. They accuse China of throwing Uighurs into camps and targeting their religion and entire culture. With the support of the Pulitzer Center, Nick Schifrin reports from a city many Uighurs have fled to, Istanbul.
Istanbul is 2,500 miles from Xinjiang, China. Muslim Uighurs who live here are free, but their minds are still imprisoned.
I never imagined this could happen in the 21st century. Innocent people subjected to cuffs on their hands, shackles, and black hoods over their heads.
Gulbahar Jalilova lives alone in a small apartment. The injuries she suffered in Chinese detention 2 years ago have healed, but she hasn't gotten over the memories.
I saw them, 14-year-old girls to 80-year-old women. They take them for interrogation. They would come back and their bodies were bruised, their heads swollen. After 3 months, they put a black hood over my head and took me away.
Is it still upsetting? What are you thinking about?
I feel like I'm in there right now, there in the cell. I'll never forget this as long as I live. They destroyed my life.
Abdul Salam Muhammad also found sanctuary here on the banks of the Bosphorus. He and every Uyghur we spoke to live in self-imposed exile because they are too scared of the Chinese government to go home. Can you describe for us what that detention center was like?
They brought everyone in there because they called us suspicious. There is unimaginable oppression inside. Every day they'd toss us a little bread and water so that we didn't die. And every day they would interrogate 15 or 20 of us with unbearable brutality. We are a people who've lost their freedom. We became their target because we'd studied religion and because we had influence in our society. They locked us up in jail. Then, after taking us to a camp, they'd tell us that we hadn't done anything wrong, that they were just educating us.
The Chinese say they are re-educating Uyghurs by teaching them Chinese and vocational skills. This is state media video. The detainees we interviewed and international researchers call it staged and scripted, a facade that hides what's really happening. As seen in the only video that exists of a camp under construction, the entrance has an iron gate, the windows have bars, and the cells look like jails. And in this drone video the U.S. believes is authentic, prisoners in blue with shaved heads are kept blindfolded and are led away, one police officer per prisoner. Muhammad says what the Chinese call schools for re-education are actually prisons for brainwashing.
The 10 hours of class they would teach one day were the exact same hours they'd teach the next. The goal was to change our minds, our faith, our beliefs. It was a plot to force us to renounce our religion.
The Chinese call some Muslim Uyghurs extremists and terrorists. In 2009, Uyghurs in Xinjiang's capital rioted. Almost 200 died, and hundreds more were injured, mostly Han Chinese, the ethnic group that represents 90% of the country. Uyghur militants affiliated with al-Qaeda took credit for this 2013 attack in Tiananmen Square that killed 2 people. And China blames male and female Uyghur militants for this 2014 knife attack that killed more than 30. Those attacks are claimed by Uyghurs who call Xinjiang East Turkestan, which self-declared independence in the early 20th century. China says it's administered Xinjiang since 60 BC, and Foreign Minister Wang Yi says China is fighting separatists.
The education and training centers are schools that help the people free themselves from the influence of extremism and terrorism and acquire professional skills. The centers are anything but horrific concentration camps.
But in Xinjiang and a neighboring province, residents say China's launched a campaign against Islam. The government has partially or completely destroyed at least a dozen mosques. And Uyghurs say the Chinese aren't only targeting their religion. In Istanbul, Uyghurs describe how China criminalized Uyghur language and all Uyghur culture. International researchers have called that campaign cultural genocide. China has even banned Uyghur music. Yusuf Suleiman sings about a culture that's been lost and a people who've been silenced.
They're disappearing our famous artists, composers, and songwriters before anyone else. They're disappearing our intellectuals. They've burned what they wanted to burn and scrubbed what they wanted to scrub.
He gave us photos of all his family members who have disappeared into camps. He hasn't heard from any of them in more than 2 years.
The absolute worst thing is that I don't know whether they're dead or alive. Our communication is completely cut off.
The attacks on Uyghur culture extend to clothes and the core of a conservative Muslim culture.
When's the last time you were able to speak to your wife?
Yasin Zunin came here hoping to expand his business and then bring his wife and daughter. But as soon as he left, he says the government kidnapped them and threw them into camps. That was more than 3 years ago.
We've been each other's life. I don't feel for anything beside my wife and children. Even when I wake up at 2 in the morning, I check my phone to see if I can find videos of them.
One night, he did find something. Photos online of his daughter in a Chinese school, dressed in a Han Chinese costume instead of traditional Uyghur clothes. And a video of his wife and other Uyghur women wearing traditional Chinese makeup and costumes. That's his wife. He calls her a sheep forced to wear the wolf's clothing.
They are trying to make us deny our own culture, and they are targeting and assaulting our women. Instead of suffering from this kind of shame, I wanted to just die and be over with everything. If I can't protect my woman, how can I call myself a man?
Abliz Ablikim says many Uyghur men have been powerless to protect their families from the Chinese government.
Can you tell me how a Han Chinese ended up basically as a member of your family?
Ever since the government began locking up most of the men, women, children, and the elderly have been left behind. The government has sent officials to be ears in these households. They sent one to my uncle's house.
Ablikim takes out his phone and opens a grainy photo. His aunt in Uyghur clothes, his uncle in Uyghur clothes holding his baby cousin, and then a Han Chinese man posing like a member of the family. But he's not a member of the family.
Was he forced onto your family?
He was forced. He wouldn't be able to live there if he weren't.
State media does stories on Han Chinese inserted into Uyghur families and calls the program United as One Family. 1.1 million Han Chinese have been sent by the government into Muslim homes.
In your opinion, why is the Chinese government doing this?
They refer to Uyghurs as criminals. If we ask them what our crime is, they say openly, "Aren't you Uyghur? That's crime enough."
In Xinjiang's capital, a huge statue of Chairman Mao looms over the city. In multiple interviews across China, we heard the same thing. China's fighting terrorism and fake news. Su Ge is a former ambassador and former head of one of the Chinese Foreign Ministry's think tanks.
China and the United States, I think that we feel the same about the extremists. We also have this danger of terrorism. The best way to eradicate radicalism is to provide education, to provide development.
There have been cases of imprisonment that are on a mass scale, not just of
terrorists or suspected terrorists, but actually entire families and entire cities.
Oh, well, to us, that's just somebody's trying to write a story about it.
Meaning,
I
you think they're fiction?
But I would say that if you have only interviewed those people who, for some reasons, who are paid for, somehow.
Do you think they're paid to tell these stories?
I do not know. I'm only saying that, but they must have a source for income. You ask them, how many policemen have been injured, and just by terrorists.
But in the name of pursuing terrorists, international researchers say China turned Xinjiang into an open-air prison. Local residents say police keep a close eye on all Uyghurs, interrogate them wherever they go, check their documents every few feet, and forcibly collect DNA samples. And researchers identify at least 85 camps, and probably many more, across Xinjiang. All of them are recently built. A barren field in August 2016 became, in 1 year, what researchers say is a former school turned into a camp with barricades and barbed wire. Just 6 miles away, researchers say another camp started being built in early 2017. By late 2018, there were barricades, watchtowers, and barbed wire enclosures, and more than 1 million square feet of buildings. The U.S. says more than 1 million Uyghurs have disappeared into Chinese detention. On the outskirts of Istanbul, Uyghurs have been doing their own building to try and protect their identity. It's a school where hundreds of Uyghur children are being raised and educated in Uyghur language and history. The children are all right because their memories aren't formed, but the adults stare into the distance, trying but failing to forget. Akil Shamsky is the English teacher.
First, my mother was arrested, and 3 months later, they released my mother, dead body. My mother was very healthy when she was at home. 3 months later, she died.
It is impossible to walk through here without adults asking to share their stories, so we assembled 5 of them.
Could you raise your hand if you have multiple members of your families currently in a camp in Xinjiang?
Sirajuddin Abukadir fled Xinjiang after the Chinese threatened to take his passport. Today, he's the school security guard. He hasn't heard from his family since he left them 3 years ago.
I told my children farewell, and we will meet again. That's the only thing I got to say to them. I never thought this would happen. I'm security here. They provide my meals. At this age, I cannot do anything else. That is what God gave me. I'm incredibly lonely.
Everyone here has their own stories of family imprisonment. Both of Tursun Yasin's brothers, 42-year-old Abdugeni Musa's daughter, and other children. Ablet Tursun spent 1 month inside a camp, and 72-year-old Amina Emmet is the principal's mother.
Do you know where your children are?
I don't know. I'm searching for any kind of news every day.
The Chinese say they have closed the camps and Uyghurs have returned home, but everyone here says their family members are still missing. Emmet's 19 children, grandchildren, and their spouses are still missing.
I wish God would free us from the Chinese. The Uyghurs are too weak to resist. There are no Uyghur people left, no people left in our homeland. My eldest son passed away years ago. I basically raised the 2 of his kids myself, but even they were taken away.
Now every Uyghur, no matter of inside of jail or outside of jail, is feeling the same thing. Fear of disappear from the world.
A few miles away, Gulbahar Jalilova's mind is still in detention.
I'm drinking tea, I'm eating bread, but those helpless people are desperate. They don't have enough to eat. I see them all in front of me, as if I were still in the camp myself.
After she was released, she wrote down all the names of the people in her cell.
Zamira, Guzela, Maryam,
Just one of what could be tens of thousands of cells across Xinjiang, China.
Gulbahar Özbek, Bukhilcham, Ayturem, Buzurem, Zulpiya, Aynisem, Aynisakhan, Munawar.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin in Istanbul.
Rahilem.
Extraordinary. Tomorrow on NewsHour Weekend, our China series ends with Nick Schifrin reporting from Hong Kong. And on our website, we take a visual exploration of the so-called re-education centers where 1 million Uighurs are now being held. And you can watch all the stories from our series, China, Peace and Prosperity, online at pbs.org/newshour.